All right, test, test. How do I turn this thing on? Hello? Can you guys hear me? Okay, there we are. All right. Hey everyone, welcome to my talk today. So I'm Nicholas Fett. I am actually one of the founders of Teller. We're an oracle on EVM chains. And then I'm also here to talk about Karen, which is something else that I'm running, and you're never going to guess this, but it is a private stablecoin. All right. So what's kind of the goal? So whenever we talk about private stablecoin, I know it was actually a great lead-up talk. Hopefully you guys were just here for it. What's sort of the goal been? And I would say that the goal has always been, what's the holy grail of cryptocurrency? And it's this: you have a private stablecoin, the peer-to-peer electronic cash that it holds its value. It can be used in any way as, a currency, or you can use it as collateral. It's cross-chain. It's amazing. And let's actually get into what exactly this means and how we're going to build it. So the first thing is you want to store a value. So this knocks out almost every single cryptocurrency out there at the moment. Whenever you're building a currency, this goes back to kind of traditional currency design, and this is probably what I'm going to talk most about today. You want to make sure that your asset is worth roughly equal to what it is today, or else you're just not going to hold it. You're going to either want to get rid of it, or it's an investment where you're going to want to not spend it. The other thing, easily transferable. So this is why gold is not traditionally a very good currency. Same with if you're talking, barter system, why people didn't like using cows to trade for chickens. They're not easily transferable. Actually, it's not divisible. But we're using digital money, so we sort of solve that natively. But the big problems for when we have a digital money are, how do you make it private? And then one that actually a lot of people don't necessarily talk about is how do you actually do it offline? So we have a lot of problems when it comes to that. So there's actually two separate issues when you're making a currency. So I really want to talk about whenever we're building this, think about like, how do we actually compete with the US dollar? Let's get back to the old goals of crypto. The two separate issues whenever you're making any sort of money is who issues it, and then how do you process the transaction? So they're two completely separate issues. The first one is almost always the government. So they actually don't have this problem, because like, who gets to mint the US dollar? Well, it's generally the treasury, and then they hand it over to the banks to issue some debt-based currencies. But it's roughly centralized, so you don't have to deal with that. But whenever we're making a decentralized one, that's actually the prime problem here, is how do you actually mint this in such a way that it's decentralized, it's fair, and sort of the values, which is what I'm going to get into, the values of your currency are actually baked in at the issuance of it. And then the second piece is the processing. So you want to make sure that you think about the processing whenever you're doing the issuance, but they're actually completely separate issues. So like everybody knows now, you could take a stable coin and you could lock it in, say like Railgun or Tornado Cash Novo, or some account abstraction wallet, and you can start getting some better processing of it. And you want to solve those problems, but I'm actually mainly going to talk about the first one today, and then I think Frederica, who's talking next, is probably going to talk about the next one. So if you can listen to her talk on more of how we deal with processing these transactions. Okay. On to story time for you guys. So this will be, I want you guys to think about the values of whenever you're making a stable coin or whenever you're making a money. And to do that, I'll introduce the tale of the 11th round. Maybe some of you guys have heard this one before. But imagine you have an island, and there's 10 people on an island, and it's the classic economic example island where you have the farmer, you have the baker, you have the shoemaker, and an explorer comes, and he sees this whole economy going on, but they're all still using the barter system. The one guy has cows, and he trades a cow for a bunch of shoes, who trades it for a bunch of chickens, and it's very, very inefficient. And the explorer goes, "Hey guys, just wait. We can do better than this." So he takes out a cowhide and he stamps out 10 rounds for each person, and he gives these 10 rounds to each person, and he says, listen, each one of these rounds is worth the value of a chicken. You're all going to trade these around, and then now it's going to be way more efficient. You don't have to use this barter system. And they're all like, oh, wow, this is so cool. And he says, okay, but wait. Since this is such a great invention, you guys obviously have to pay me for it. So at the end of the year, you guys all have to give me back 11 rounds. So there's going to be 10% interest on these rounds. Okay, so what's the obvious issue with this? So he gave 10 people 10 rounds each, and he wants 10 people to each give him back 11 rounds. Obviously, where does that 11th round come from? And this is actually the current debt-based monetary system we have today. There's two ways that you can sort of pay back those 11 rounds. The first is if you constantly grow. So if new people come onto the island and new people start taking out loans, everybody who borrowed 10 rounds can sort of pay back their 11 rounds, and it works as long as the economy is continuously growing. But the way it might work if the economy is not growing is maybe if one of those guys goes out of business. So if one of those 10 people just hands over, they lose, then you can actually pay back your 11 rounds. And what this actually fosters is it fosters competition. It fosters this mentality for growth. You need growth at every stage or else things collapse because you have to constantly be in competition with each other to pay back. And this is baked into the system. So what may have been a cooperative economy at the start, just by how you design the money, actually can't be a cooperative economy because you're competing. So that's kind of why I want to think about, what are the values of the currencies that we're creating? And, how can we sort of, when we're designing these things that are supposed to be used as currencies, how can we bake our values in at the beginning or at the underlying layer? So, we had kind of talked about some of the issues with gold. It's same issues with Bitcoin. If you need a flexible supply, how do you do that? The main reason that people tend to want to go back to some asset-backed standard is that if you go to gold, or you see this with Bitcoin maxis now, don't want to offend anyone, but if they want to use it as a currency or backing a stablecoin, a lot of times it's because it will enrich them in the future, and they will be the chosen winners of the future whenever it goes to $1 trillion. And that's not necessarily the goal, or at least I would hope it isn't for most of you. You would want currencies that you can personalize. So, back to the economic example, in the 80s and 90s, if you guys remember, there was this big trend in Central America of dollarization. So the currencies in Central America, basically the governments couldn't manage them because, whether or not it was our fault for using the CIA or not, but they would destabilize their currencies, and they said, hey, you guys obviously can't manage your own currencies, why don't you just use the dollar? And this is akin to what a lot of times you see in DeFi is we're just like, well, why don't you just use the dollar, or something like that? And well, the problem is that now you're subject to the dollar's monetary policy. So a lot of times all these countries, maybe they wanted to lower interest rates to boost their economy. Maybe they were having inflation and they wanted to raise it. Well, if you're using the dollar, you're sort of subject to the dollar's monetary policy. And we want to make sure that we stay away from that. And you also want to make sure that you build something that is sort of tailored to your ecosystem, which sort of follows on the last presentation. And kind of the last point here is just how much inflation do we build into our system? So I know there was, this is sort of forbidden in the libertarian circles of crypto, but a lot of times you actually want inflation in a cryptocurrency. The reason is that, or at least in a money, because whenever you have inflation, it incentivizes people to spend it. If everyone is just hoarding their currency under their mattress or in their ledger or whatever you're using, that you're not actually spending it. You want people to have currency, but you want them to invest it in productive assets. You want people to invest in a company, invest in your community, and how inflation is actually one great way to promote that. So you want to build these in at the base layer. Now on to my project. So, okay, so doing okay on time here. So this is Karen. So little bit of a background. So I'll kind of talk about how it works here. You guys can chew on this big diagram here, but I was originally trying to build, so it was how do I do a cross-chain tornado cache was the original idea, Yeah, 2 years ago. And the problem is so what you would do is you would take a Tornado Cash deposit. If you guys, I'm pretty sure most of you know how it works. You deposit ETH into a pool with a zero knowledge proof, and then anyone can come and withdraw money to any different address as long as you have a proof that you made a deposit in this pool. That's simplifying it. But the idea I had was, if you put the proof on one chain, then you could pass the proof to, say, a whole bunch of other chains, and then now you have sort of disappeared. Nobody knows what chain you're on, and you can withdraw it. The obvious problem is that, well, the ETH you locked is on one chain. How do you withdraw it on a different chain? And basically, I just created a synthetic asset. So you have what's called the Karen dollar. And so you would have, that's sort of what I tried to draw here. But you would have ETH, so let's say you have an ETH and Polygon pool. You would have ETH CHD on one side and Matic CHD on the other. You deposit ETH to mint a certain amount of CHD. The proof is passed over, so I use, shocker, Teller as the oracle to pass it over. And then you can withdraw in a secret fashion, or it's a Tornado Cash Nova pool, so you can also privately transact in a shielded state while you're over there. And then you can withdraw over on the other side. So that's the crux of what I built. But the next piece is, well, okay, well, how is this stable in any way, shape, or form? Well, if you don't stabilize it, if you just set it up as far as, right now it's set up on Gnosis chain, Polygon, and Optimism. So you have these three assets with pools linked, and it acts as basically a multi-collateral LP token amongst them. That's like how it would traditionally act, so then how do you stabilize it? The way that you would stabilize it is as more and more people pull CHD into, they're actually using it as a currency. So it's in this shielded state. It's actually not on the AMMs. So if you pull tokens off the AMMs and you leave the deposited collateral on AMMs, well, what happens to the price? Also, the price goes up. So if you have a bunch of ETH and then some CHD, if you have a whole bunch of CHD, the price of CHD is lower per ETH. So basically, you just want to, you need a way to incentivize people to deposit more CHD in a pool on one side. And that's what I do. So this is basically, you manipulate the interest rates in such a way to incentivize people to LP in one way or another. To simplify this in the real world example, so this will probably be more familiar for some of you if you're into like the MMT theory of how money works. Whenever like the US Treasury, so if you have a whole bunch of money out circulating and inflation's really, really high, how do you suck money out of circulation in your economy? Well, you would want to raise rates. And so if you raise rates, then what's going to happen is that more and more people are going to, okay, well, we can pull money out of circulation and we'll go deposit it into treasury accounts. And that's basically what we're doing here, is we're sucking money out of circulation, hopefully lowering the economic activity, lowering the inflation in your asset, and vice versa. So yeah, it's just kind of trying to take the traditional economic way of lowering or raising inflation and put it into this. So anyway. The future, so right now, the interest rate stuff, it's still very nascent. So I launched this completely decentralized, so there's no upgrades, nothing like that. We'll just relaunch it whenever we sort of tweak it. Figuring out how best to do the stabilization, because there's an inherent trade-off between sort of stability and then collateralization. If one of the big problems with a lot of derivatives right now is a lot of stable coins, is that they're actually not stable coins, they're just derivative instruments. So if you have like DAI or RAI, like this is just an over-collateralized derivative instrument that's meant to be short ETH US dollar. And the problem with it being a short ETH US dollar is, you can be relatively hard pegged to the dollar, but it's not necessarily a currency. It doesn't really function like a free-floating currency, and that's what we're actually trying to create, at least I think. The other problem with that is if you have somebody who's, if you want to go short ETH US dollar, you actually need somebody who wants to go long ETH US dollar on the other side of your trade, and that's a big problem for a lot of these stable coins, is that you have a bunch of demand for people who are like, of course I'll pay $1 for DAI, or of course I'll pay $1 for RAI, but then nobody wants to go long ETH US dollar on the other side, especially in times that everyone wants to go short ETH US dollar. Other things that we're doing in the future, so right now we use Teller as a bridge. Obvious ways, you can make it a whole lot faster. People are working on light clamp bridges, lots of cool stuff. You can make this crazy, crazy fast. And then better processing, which we're going to talk about. How can you make this how can you use, hopefully we're going to be plugging in some account abstraction just natively into this so that way we can piggyback on all those relayer mechanisms that sort of make privacy work. And I know like a lot of people would say like you don't have to build privacy into this, but I think all of our protocols should just be building privacy natively in, because then you don't have to do, people will natively choose not to do private things. So make sure that you build it in right here. So anyway, I think I'm about done. If you want to get involved, feel free to email me if you want to learn more about Teller. It's just like a GitHub repo with the white paper now. But yeah, would love to take a question or two. Anybody? Frederica.
Does the cross-chain nature actually break the proof of innocence concepts that we've seen recently pop up?
So she asked if it's like the proof of innocence. So basically you can prove that, your stuff didn't interact with anybody else's. You could easily put that in there. Come on. Like I'm just trying, like I think you want to have fun with it, and I think ultimately, I don't think the proof of innocence, like this is more just off topic completely, but I think the proof of innocence thing doesn't actually solve anything. Like I don't think regulators are going to buy it in any sense of the word, or oh, you can prove that, like ultimately you are providing anonymity to a lot of these people, because if you're going in there and they're going in there, you are providing anonymity, even if you can prove that your funds didn't touch them. So, I think that's where regulators are going to have the sticking point, not necessarily like, oh, you can prove it. So, anyway, anything else? Right here down front, or am I done? I don't know. All right, yeah, shout out a question.
We've launched the protocol with no admin keys, no upgradability, and ultimately when we go cross-chain, we also would like not to rely on bridges. So I know it's a longer answer and we can catch up later and we can talk deeper, but I'm wondering like how far did you go with your research on both of those topics? Like how do you actually migrate people? And I mean that's simpler for us anyway, but
like how do you do cross-chain stuff basically?
But then the bigger one is how do you do cross-chain stuff without bridges, like. Yeah, I just wonder how far did you go with your research? What's
yeah, so I mean, I obviously run Teller, so like we use it, and I know it's decentralized, which is why I like using it. And the big issue with Teller right now is that it's slow. So when you deposit, like I make you wait 12 hours to go withdraw on the other side. And there's two benefits to this. I think a lot of people have sort of the dream UX that I'm seeing now that most people are talking about is that like you would have this slower bridge path. So like Teller or like Hashi is one, like Gnosis is doing like a bridge aggregator where it's this very slow, super secure bridge. And the only people that would do that would be the big giant whales. And then you would have much smaller, more centralized, like really fast bridges. So like Connext or some of these other services where like, hey, I want to go over there. And they would just say, okay, here you go. Here's $20. Like we'll bridge you over in a centralized fashion for 0.5%, and then they take the slow route in a decentralized way. So I think that's going to be the future. But yeah, I would say definitely just build it out slow at first, and then go down with speed, because once your users get used to really, really fast, you can't go back. So yeah.
You mentioned that a lot of stablecoins are actually just derivative assets, and you pointed out that they have counterparties, which is the protocol implicitly. How is CHD different? Like it seems like the LPs would be counterparties to CHD.
Yeah, I think more of what I was saying is it's more, as far as a derivative goes, it's much more like pegged as far as like, they don't allow for much free floating. in there. They're not trying to, like, if you have more demand for your currency should sort of go up a little bit in value. And you should have some mechanism for stabilizing it, but just sort of relying constantly on this arbitrage opportunity without any ability to let it go up or down can sort of be a hard pill to get a lot of usage. So anyway, I think I'm good, but thanks everyone.